Keese like walking the halls. Like now we actually see this, we see blood on the walls and we see like, there you are. We see the new owners talking about MTV Cribs as he's taking us on a tour. Like, what was it like to like film inside Girardi Keese?
It's something that we've been trying to get into the office for years. We tried for the first one and it didn't work out. Um, so for this one, I think it was a big moment for us. It was fascinating. We've driven by that office many times. We've seen photos from inside. But to go in and see, it really is, as they describe, it's sort of this opulent, beautiful office with these columns and it's very stately. But there is an eeriness given, if everything that happened is true, there was an eeriness you felt of this was a place people went to get help. And for some clients, it was the opposite experience. I think Kimberly described that very well. This was a place that was supposed to help people and it hurt them.
Because it has a sort of haunted value to it. And the place is huge. It is a massive, like kind of two set of buildings. And he really did take us through like every part of it. It's not just the parts that are above ground that you see. There's a whole section below ground, where you see where they used to keep all of the files together. There's so many different spaces. There's a war room. I mean, there's all of this stuff. And Gary Dordick, who is the attorney who now owns the property, Jake was the one who actually he good time, good timing, good chemistry got us in, just in a really kind of like good moment. But Gary, it's not his only office, so a lot of it right now is still very empty, and it does have that kind of like, you almost could feel how loud it would be or how busy it would be if the place was crammed like it probably was under Girardi, where all those desks were filled and all the offices had attorneys in them, and every level of the place was just churning with people and all the cases that came in and out of that place. There is a sort of haunted feeling to the building.
And I
Oh.
think Gary talked about, he watched the first Housewife and it's very familiar, was familiar with Girardi as this force in LA law. And I think he speaks to something a lot of lawyers told us of, what he did brought a lot of shame on the profession. And I think for a lot of attorneys, it's about standing up and reminding people that, this was just one person and he doesn't speak for an industry. So he's trying, I think that was part of why he wanted to talk and buy the building. And, he talks about wanting to bring honor and integrity back to that space.
When he got there, he talks a lot about this. A lot of the stuff was still there. I mean, like, yeah, all the furnishings, but the awards and like all this other stuff, it's just stuff everywhere. And so he has had a colossal task in kind of like cleaning out the building and getting rid of a lot of the stuff that was in there. That's been he talked about that. That was probably one of the things that probably hit the cutting room floor. I mean, we could have, it felt like you could have stayed in there and done a lot inside the building, but that was it was a very interesting day that we got to spend kind of walking the halls of the former Girardi Keese.
Well, I know, like you mentioned in the beginning, you were asked this many times already, but I mean, what is up with part three? I mean, we end and we see, Erika, promise things to the victims that day that she would help them, and then we see that like, the screen where it says she's not really contacted the victims since then. Now we have Tom is competent to stand trial, which is happening in May. Seems like there's a lot that's unwrapped up for, it's like laying it out for you for a part three here.
Only time will tell. I think the story, as you said, we're right in the middle of it. It's not the end. It's far from over. So we'll see. I mean, certainly, Knez and Katie and I will continue to follow the latest, and we'll see what happens.
And ABC and Nightline, I mean, ABC, we've been following all of this, and we report on it even when we're not doing documentaries about it. So there will always be coverage. But yes, as far as the part three, the answer is back where we were after we finished part one, and people were asking about part two. It's like to be continued.
What about, I met you when you covered Scandival. I mean, I was in the house, I was in the Randall scandal. Like, what about all this other stuff, just Shaw Shocker, like anything else we might see a part two on, anything else you guys are working on in the Bravo verse? There's a lot still going on in the Bravo verse that maybe could be covered.
I think reality TV is always going to be potentially a rich area to mine when it comes to stories, because these are people who are going on TV to talk is, in a world of reality. So potentially there's always going to be fodder there. I mean, it people who work in the social media sphere and watch reality TV, it feels like they're talking about something every other day. But of course, when it rises, we'll be reporting on it as well.
Yeah, and these are the kind of stories we look for at ABC News Studios. It's sort of what's in the cultural zeitgeist, what are people talking about, but then, you know, what seems like it's poppy on the surface, but we can just go a little bit deeper and there's a larger story there. That's kind of what we look for. This, you might think it's one thing, you might think it's Sequins and Housewives, but it's really this large story about accountability. So we're always in looking for stuff like that.
Final two questions as we wrap up. Does anything shock you guys? Like, I mean, not even about Tom and Erika and all this, just like in general, because of what you do. And you've covered so many different stories, like, at ABC News, that having nothing to do with reality TV. Like, do you guys have a shock value anymore when you start looking into some of these things that you cover?
I think the day that we don't is probably the day we don't need to do this anymore. So yes, there every day you're in a newsroom and something happens and you're like, whoa, or oh my goodness, you know what I mean? Like that never goes away. So I think the day that we become cynical enough to not be shocked is the day we probably shouldn't be telling stories to the country or the world anymore, because you have to have that human value. Otherwise, we would not be reporting it very well.
It's a good point. And totally unrelated, I just had on a school teacher who she used to make $47,000 as a school teacher, and now she made $1 million on OnlyFans. I know this is a loaded question to ask at the end because this could be a whole episode in and of itself, but anything, Jake, that you learned from your documentary on OnlyFans?
Yeah, that was OnlyFans Selling Sexy. We produced that a couple years ago. Um, I think like all the stories we do, it's a very human story. You meet people who work really, really hard and have these very full and diverse lives. I think for me, we as a society and as a country have a lot of stigma around sex work. And so I think my hope is people, when they watch that documentary, realize there's a lot more than meets the eye. There's a lot there, and that people work really hard and, do what they can to make it. Um, yeah, that was a
Talk
great
about
one to do. I'm really proud of that one as well. That's like another example. You think it's one thing, but then you get going and it is a deeper story about stigma and who we judge and why we judge them and what that says about ourselves ultimately.
I
talk
stand
about
by all
talk
that.
about something that could be a massive series, right? Like Jake got in there, and I think pretty early on, and like and just found a bunch of really interesting people, and it just really humanizes people in a way that it's an incredible piece of work. I remember when Jake was working on it, and it was just like every day they came out and it would tell us something new, and we were like, oh, it's going to be amazing, and it really is. It's a great doc.
I love it. Yes, I totally agree with everything you said about OnlyFans and society and how we judge people. Well, you guys will have to both come back when something else breaks or when The Housewife and the Hustler Part 3 comes out. You'll